Well, thank you, Eli. And I also want to start by additionally thanking Judith Asen and then arriving today Barry and Charlie have helped set up this audio-visual assemblage here, and it seems to be working right now. Hopefully the folks online can hear as well. And I want to start with thanking all of those folk and thanking all of you for coming, especially on such a rotten rainy day, and making the trip out here. I said to Judith that to some extent this terrible weather is metaphorizing the perfect storm of crises hitting farm workers in their region. And as Judith pointed out to me,
just wanted to make you feel at home.
Yeah, and it makes me feel at home, yes, from rainy Britain. And I'm going to be talking a lot about that perfect storm as I go on. The third thank you, in addition to thanking you all for coming and thanking the organizers, is to thank you all as Emeriti for creating UCSC and making it the university that it is. When I came here in 2017, it really felt like a wonderful sort of restart to my own academic career, in part because of the incredibly generative interdisciplinary space this university represents, a place of true intellectual freedom and creativity. And it's, you know, due to the hard work of so many faculty that it, including all of you, that it looks the way it is. And I mean, the campus, as Anna Singh pointed out recently in a big public talk, you know, some folks have done their darndest to ruin the beautiful landscape, but institutionally, there's a lot of great things to celebrate still about UCSC. So thank you for creating this place. So from three thank yous, I want to introduce my talk and it's really organized as three acts with a prologue and an epilogue. In the prologue, I want to address something that Judith said it would be useful for me to address, and that is the Global and Community Health Program and what it looks like, because evidently some of you are interested in that tonight, and I'm glad to share a little bit about that. And then I will move on to this central topic of farm worker health in the context of climate crisis, and these three forms of resilience I want to go through: resourcing resilience, reactionary resilience, and reparative resilience. And then in the Q&A, I want to address university resilience as well. Along the way, you know, I'm using the opportunity of this talk to reflect on the meanings of resilience. Most of you, all of us, use it as a sort of a shorthand for recovering from trauma, recovering both individually from personal forms of trauma, but also recovering in the community and larger political groups from various assaults. So resilience is this capacity to come back from crisis. But what I want to argue and show today is that there are so many inequalities within resilience, and there's so many different ways in which resilience gets recoded. And we need to pay attention to these variations if we're to actually build more resilience for more people effectively. So the prologue on global and community health. Some of you may remember the short-lived provost EVC, Marlene Tromp, who had a strategic planning exercise. And many strategic plans just go in a cupboard after they've been developed. But one thing that came out of the one that she began was a conversation that continued primarily between the sciences and social sciences, PB-Sci and Soc-Sci, but also including folks from engineering, the arts and the humanities around creating a global and community health program. And in the Q&A, I can talk a little bit more if you're interested in why it has that particular and somewhat strange formula as a title. What we've done under that umbrella over the last few years since the strategic plan is start 2 new degrees, which were approved by the Faculty Senate 4 years ago. And since then, this BA and BS in Global and Community Health now have between them 550 majors. So it's grown quite quickly. Among the features of the degree, we really celebrate the interdisciplinary opportunity we have to pool the expertise across divisions in terms of creating a curriculum for these students, but as well as creating pathways through the sciences and the social sciences, we make it possible for the students to interconnect both at the beginning in a foundations course that they take for both degrees and in 2 capstone courses. And one of these capstone courses I think might be interesting for all of you as Emeriti, which it's focused on helping students polish a so-called e-portfolio. It's an online description of their best work and a set of reflections on their best work. And why I think it might be interesting to you, I mean, at some level, it's just an online CV, but I think it also works as a form of narrative assessment, a kind of way of reviving UCSC's famed narrative assessment tools from yesteryear before grades came in. And it works for our students, I think, really well. If you go to our website, and you'll see it, yes, you'll see here that we've got lots of student e-portfolios showcased. And if I focus on Ali Gutierrez here for a moment, who comes from a Latina background, a farm working family background, and she is typical of many of our students. She found the opportunity of narrating her own learning in her e-portfolio as an opportunity to turn what were quite adverse experiences in the community into a form of expertise, so that she could say, because I come from a farm worker family background, because I know how many troubles these communities face, I could combine that knowledge with all the things I've learned at UCSC to become someone who can really contribute to the Californian health workforce of the future. And it turns, some adversity this way into a form of expertise. And it seems to be working very well for our students in that way. So I've got to get this back to the whole screen. Excuse me a second here. I need to be in full screen mode. Sorry. I'm just going to stretch
The green dot.
The green dot, where
Upper left corner of your window.
Oh, thanks. Oh, thank you so much. This is the power of interdisciplinarity as well in action. The program is not just about education, it's about research, and the research that I'm going to show you today is part of that, and yet there's so much more exciting work being done around health at the university that we can talk about. I've got to get better at going back and forth between these pages because I've got a lot to go through that way. Because it's no, please. All right. That's my bold head on the side there. Okay, here we go. So Another thing we do is an annual photo contest. That's been a nice way for students from the arts and the humanities, as well as the other divisions, to contribute. And some of you, including Jim, who's here today, have done video interviews with me about the power of photography and some of the pitfalls students can run into when they're using photography to do social documentary of health challenges of various kinds. And now I've worked it out. And we have started a student journal, the UCSC Journal of Social Medicine, that the students themselves are running. So these are some of the things that have characterized global and community health thus far. We recently received a gift of about $1.4 million from the generous Websters, Alec and Claudia Webster, who I'm sure many of you know have donated to other things on campus of great value, including the John Lewis College, Rachel Carson College. With this gift, we are organizing the other capstone, not the e-portfolio one, but the other one that students have to do to finish their degree, where they work together, pooling their expertise across the sciences and social sciences to tackle real-world health challenges. And they do so in a group of about 25 students working on this problem. And I've taught one, actually two now, on farm worker health vulnerabilities and what to do about them in California. And this was the report that my student class put together, and it's a huge report. It's, as you can see here at the bottom, 446 pages long. They did a fantastic job looking at all the different vulnerabilities. And as you'll see as we go forward, some of the artwork that they created is now being used in the program Camposano that I'm going to describe as an actual intervention to try to address farm worker health vulnerabilities. This gift from the Websters allows us to recruit people from the community to be teachers of the class and pay them to bring in their expertise, whether it's retired physicians, retired public health experts, people who've worked in government and so forth. And so we can bring in a lot of external expertise this way. So that's my prologue. And that last example of the capstone is an introduction also to Act 1 of my talk, which is on resourcing resilience, providing resources that expand resilience capacity. And we have sought to do this in a project that was funded by the state of California with a $2 million grant called a Climate Action Grant. And we recently held on October the 4th a conference on campus. You may have seen this banner that was at the entrance. We had welcomes for the conference that brought together farm workers who have become promotoras de salud, health workers basically, and their community advocacy organizations, lots of students, lots of faculty, and politicians. And we were lucky to have State Senator John Laird join us in person to do a welcome speech. And then we had this remarkable speech recorded for us in advance by US Senator Adam Schiff. And I just want to play you Senator Schiff's words of welcome specifically for this conference, which underline some of the intersecting challenges that farm workers face. And he does it with political finesse.
Hi, everyone. It's Senator Adam Schiff, and I want to thank you for allowing me to join you, even virtually, and thank you to the University of California at Santa Cruz for hosting this important gathering. First, I want to acknowledge the farm workers that are in attendance and thank them personally for the food that they put on my table, at tables throughout California, and indeed throughout the world. I've seen just how hard you work through very difficult conditions. I have such admiration and respect for that work. You feed all of us, and I'm mindful of the extraordinary challenges that you face every day, challenges that are particularly acute right now in the face of these indiscriminate immigration raids throughout the state of California and indeed throughout the country. But one of the challenges I know you're gathered to address today is the impact of climate on the nature of the threat to the food supply and those who produce the food for our tables. So with climate change, we're seeing farm workers working in extreme heat and all the risk associated with that. We're seeing wildfires adjacent to farmland or burning farmland and the smoke inhalation and other impacts on farm workers. We're seeing pest and disease patterns migrate as a result of changing climate. All of this putting enormous pressure on our food system and presenting important threats that have to be addressed to our farm workers. Now, science can help us address some of these threats. Science can help us with new technologies to ease some of the burden of growing produce with new technologies. But it's also important that we have new safeguards in place so that people who are working so hard to put food on our table are adequately protected from heat, from smoke, and from other challenges, from pesticides, so that they can continue to do that work safely, providing for themselves, their families, and all of our families. So all of you gathered here today, those who are the farm workers themselves and advocates, those who are with community-based organizations, scientists and researchers, combining your collective wisdom, identifying solutions for policymakers, for farms and farming communities is really essential to keeping our agriculture sector healthy. I'm enormously proud that California is the #1 agriculture producing state of the union. I'm grateful to have been assigned to serve on the Agriculture Committee, something I requested, where I can champion the needs of farm workers, our farmers, and our families. And the insights that you gather and share at the conference will be enormously beneficial to me and to policymakers at the state, local, as well as federal levels. So thank you for coming together. I look forward to hearing the fruits of your labor at the conference and how we can apply those lessons learned to improve the quality and safety of those who put food on the table, but also make it possible, make it sustainable for us to grow the finest produce anywhere to be found in the world. Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
So pretty impressive that he did that specifically for a conference at UCSC and really went out of his way during a incredibly frantic time in DC to carefully script and then record a speech like that. And I thought the speech really did effectively set the tone for the deliberations we had that day, both on describing the nature of the crisis, but suggesting in addition that people would be heard if they proposed strategies for resilience that involved creating safeguards. It wasn't just about innovation of ag tech, he argued, but also about putting in place safeguards. And that was really heartening for the farm workers and promotores who came to hear that and to sense that not all politicians in DC were undermining everything that they were trying to do to improve farm worker community health. So what Senator Schiff did effectively, we have also sought to do intellectually, conceptually, to try to organize our project as an intervention that can address the confluence of compounding problems facing farm workers. They're not easily reduced to one independent variable. There are so many things coming together. One useful term for describing that confluence, I think, is polycrisis. Not when you treat polycrisis as a catch-all independent variable of its own, but rather as a way of saying polycrisis is many things driving crisis. And what farm workers face really is, I said before, a perfect storm. It's the climate change driven changes, but also all sorts of social, political, and economic threats as well. So this diagram seeks to highlight those on the right-hand side as sort of coming in from the side to compound the effects of climate change coming down from the top. Extreme heat, air pollution, diminished water quality, flood damage like we saw in Pajaro, and crop failures due to new pests and drought and disease. These all threaten farm workers, not least of all by shrinking the harvest, the planting and harvest season, making the income generating weeks in the year shorter. There's fewer weeks for getting work and getting income. And so that is a threat to livelihood directly. But there are long-term problems associated with these risks, including long-term health problems, including cancer, lung damage and inflammation, and thus vulnerability to infectious diseases like COVID that affect the respiratory system. And then because of extreme heat and drought and the conditions in which farm workers face, dehydration and kidney disease. These, in turn, combining with the social and economic and political vulnerabilities, create an overall impact that some epidemiologists refer to as structural environmental vulnerability, and other more sort of social theory accounts of that structural vulnerability talk about it in terms of the combination of slow violence with fast violence. Slow violence, there's a variety of literatures using that term. They're linked in the critical medical literature by people such as Paul Farmer, who I'm going to return to in Act 3 of this talk. But in the environmental epidemiology literature, there's yet another jargon term that's used to describe these compound effects of the ecosyndemic. The syndemic is two diseases coming together like AIDS and tuberculosis that have damaging impacts because of their confluence. But an ecosyndemic adds all this environmental vulnerability on top of that. So this is one way of thinking about the poly crisis, but there are opportunities for response and building resilience. So our grant was funded by the state of California, and that's unusual. You know, other states are not doing this, and this was before Trump. It's definitely not doing it now to address climate change problems. California is also special in that it collects probably the best data in the country as it relates to environmental changes associated with climate change. In California, climate change is not a hoax. It's a real crisis that's identified as such by public agencies who collect data and need desperately now to continue that work as the federal agencies pull back. There are opportunities for response and resilience also that are lodged in the communities themselves, and farm workers and the promotores that serve them, that come out of them, and their advocates have agency and they have ideas for adaptive action. I was at a talk recently where someone who works closely with farm workers was saying they should not really be called farm workers, they should be called agricultural professionals because they have forms of expertise that need to be heard. And our university is well placed to contribute to our response because of respect here for university community engagement, including now in the personnel process. But all this resilience opportunity and the resourcing that it affords, which I'll talk about in a moment, it remains compromised. So before I get into some of the things we've done, I want to highlight some of the literatures that point to the compromises in resilience. One of the most critical writers on this before he passed away was Mark Duffield, in a book called Post-Humanitarianism and in an article entitled The Resilience of the Ruins. He argued that all sorts of innovations in data informatics operationalize experimental systems of welfare abandonment under conditions of pervasive security surveillance. He was largely talking about how development was changing and how agencies like USAID were deploying new surveillance systems to address challenges in the global south. But basically he was saying that so much grant-funded development work, including global health development work, is preoccupied with magic bullet solutions that are offering or promising resilience, but serving also at the same time as a kind of alibi for state withdrawal and a lack of attention to the actual structural drivers of vulnerability in the first place: war, chronic poverty, inequality, and so forth. There's quite a lot of literature that makes these same points. Resilient Life by Evans and Reed brings a kind of Foucauldian take to it too. Knowing those compromises are real, we nevertheless have persisted with this project. And it has at least 4 elements I want to highlight. Camposano refers, it actually came out of this meeting at Salud para la Gente in Watsonville, where people from Salud and some of these other community organizations, Center for Community Advocacy, Community Action Board, Santa Cruz County, Mujeres en Acción, were all represented primarily by promotores. And we brainstormed terms for the project. And the idea of Camposano came to the fore afterwards as the idea of a healthy field, but also playing off the term campesino. The project has in turn become an online map app, which I'll show in a moment. The logo for it was drawn by UCSC GCH students. And the app is designed to help promotores explain risks to farm workers and show where they intersect on the ground in the fields where they work. It provides links to resources. We didn't want to just highlight a bunch of risks and talk about behavioral responses. We also wanted to provide community-based resources that farm workers could actually turn to as remedies to these risks, albeit limited and not adequate remedies, but nevertheless remedies. And we also wanted to provide a reporting mechanism for farm workers to report unmitigated risks where their employers are not giving them the rights under California law. And I'll showcase that in the third part of this talk, where I talk about reparation and reparative resilience. The goal is ultimately to help farm worker advocates, Cal OSHA, and public health officials monitor farm worker communities and give them data-driven opportunities for enforcing current laws and protections. But it also can serve this app as a way of increasing public awareness about the risks farm workers face. So let me take us to the app. Hopefully it will work. It functions in English and in Spanish. I will show you in a moment a QR code so you can bring it up on your phone. You can run it on a desktop, but it's also designed to run on a smartphone when a promotor is out in the fields or in a church or in a community meeting hall and can say, let's look at my phone, and we can look at how the risks come together in the community where we are meeting. There's a lot of data in it that is drawn from state archives that I'll point to in a moment. This is always, my computer's working overtime here because of the Zoom. I've got stills, so I'll go to the stills in a moment of the different things it can do, but you can select different counties of California or show the whole of California. And you can select a category of data that you want to look up by county and by census tract. And you can also use it to see resources. I'll just go to my PowerPoint because I'll come back to it later, and hopefully by then it's loaded. So if you're interested in looking at it while I'm talking, that's the QR code. You can take a quick picture of it and it should take you to the site. If we all try and load it at the same time, it'll go even slower, but that's fine. Got it? All right. So did you get it?
No.
Oh, yeah, have another go.
I got it, but it's taking forever to load.
Yeah,
It's like your laptop.
okay. So the data comes from these different databases that California keeps, and we're synthesizing them geovisually in the map so you can see where they come together, census tract by census tract. At the same time, thanks to our GCH students, the map features resources by the same census tracts that are gathered under these different categories: general resources, legal resources, food resources, financial, housing, medical services, childcare services, and educational resources. And the students have worked really hard to talk to all the community-based organizations that we're collaborating with to make sure we include, for as many different parts of California as possible, all the resources that farm workers can turn to. It's somewhat of a moving target because organizations come and go, but there's a lot of strong organizations that have staying power, like Second Harvest, like Salud para la Gente in our region, that provide those resources on an ongoing, enduring basis. The map app also provides widgets at the bottom that are giving farm workers by location the air temperature, air quality measurement, and the air temperature for a 2-day period, showing it in pink when it's possibly dangerous to one's health to go out and work. The resources have also taken the form of flyers and brochures, and these things called rotofolios, which are basically mobile PowerPoints, which the promotores can take out into the fields and do a PowerPoint presentation effectively without any technological hassles. They can just hold these over. They've got images on the front and then the narrative or notes for the speaker on the back. And we've created these with the help of faculty from UCSC, UCB, Berkeley, and Riverside, including David Boyd, Federico Castillo, Nancy Chen, Raquel Camaro Garcia, Richard Lee, Michael Patno, Sam Ying, and then tons of global and community health students have contributed in part to the design of these rotofolios. We've taken these materials out into the field ourselves as students in collaboration with promotores particularly from CCA. This was an article in Monterey Now showcasing a meeting we held at the CCA headquarters where we were training the promotores there. But those promotores from CCA then, and that's Federico Castillo from UC Berkeley. Those promotores from CCA have been absolutely amazing, instrumental in working with our undergrads from UCSC to create effectively teams. And we went out to Huron in the Central Valley with one of these teams and presented the same materials to farm workers there in an asparagus packing plant that really had seen better days. Also at the Community Health Trust at Pajaro Valley in Watsonville. And you have, in both these cases, UCSC students working closely with a promotora and learning from each other in the process, which was really wonderful to see. So the trainer teams is the fourth thing I wanted to showcase. At the conference, we had a graphic note taker, and she beautifully captured some of the ways these different elements of the project have been brought together. This was from the intro to the conference, but I want to use it to pivot to Act 2 of my talk by noting that right from the beginning, we were attentive at this conference, as elsewhere in the work, to the ways in which action on the slow violence of climate change remains vulnerable to the fast violence of authoritarian interventions and the deportation drive coming out of Washington, D.C. So you sort of see Adam Schiff there being juxtaposed to the Trumpian Trumpian moment and a sort of cloud on the side. So the kind of specter of the federal changes does overshadow this project and remind us that what we're doing to advance resilience remains deeply threatened and compromised. But all of this work to develop educational materials for promotores to use with farm workers is not really going to get out to many communities when the communities are too frightened to show up to meetings. And that's what the folks from CCA are now experiencing. The farm workers just are not coming to get to any kind of gathering because they're desperately afraid of deportation. The community organizations are stretched to breaking point. They're losing funding, but they're also trying to handle too many crises all at once. So they're like, what do we turn to first to really address this situation? The surveillance and overarching sense of insecurity really overshadows everything. The funding for resources, all those resource centers that we put on the map, seeing their funding cut, and with the Triple B bill, the Big Beautiful Bill Act, bringing in the huge cuts to Medicaid, that will significantly compromise Medi-Cal payments that we're paying for community health workers to do a lot of the ancillary work in the community. And all the organizations that employ community health workers are now seeing massive cuts. And then that's to say nothing of cuts to federal research, but through NSF and NIH. And California is facing all these budget cuts, has the same problem. Like what fire is it going to put out first? Academics are saying, can you step up and fund more science, more research? But meanwhile, they've got to keep people alive, and the budget is limited. So we need to wrestle with the monstrous impact of reactionary versions of resilience. And this is my second act of the talk. I can be quicker with this. I introduced the first act with, what was a video epigraph from Senator Schiff. Here I want to read out the abstract of a paper that I published in 2019 with Daniel Bessner, a colleague from the University of Washington, who's an intellectual historian. The title of our paper was Reaction, Resilience, and the Trumpist Behemoth, Environmental Risk Management from Hoax to Technique of Domination. And we were trying to make sense of how Trump 1.0, the first Trump administration, was recoding resilience in this piece. So here I'm sort of switching from my critical geographer hat to sort of being more of a cultural studies, political theory hat part of the talk. So the election of Donald Trump to the US presidency has led to significant changes in environmental governance, unleashing an authoritarian, nationalistic, and business deregulating juggernaut aimed at destroying various forms of environmental protection. We seek to name and explain this juggernaut as the Trumpist behemoth. Using this terminology, we show how Neumann's classic 1942 study of the Nazi behemoth can be used to build a critique of the Trump administration's approach to governance. We join this with the contemporary critique of the climate leviathan by Mann and Wainwright, along with diverse critical literatures on resilience, to argue that the Trumpist behemoth is further distinguished by its anti-leviathan, the reactionary appropriation of the politics and practices of resilience. This creates a regime that retains certain neoliberal commitments, pro-market, market-friendly commitments to market rule, but re-articulates and re-territorializes them nationalistically, connecting business interests with a border-building vision of America first that simultaneously re-territorializes nature as national in ways that obscure the global ecosystems and contradictions of the Anthropocene cum Capitalocene, out of which the Trumpist behemoth has been birthed. That may be way too much jargon for many of you, and I apologize, but I do want to highlight the frightening value of going back to some of these early critiques of National Socialism for coming to terms with Trumpism. And some of the ways in which Trump recodes environmental concerns and resilience, his administration recodes resilience, can be understood in the way Neumann talked about the arcana domaniata tonis techniques of domination of the Nazis. So, you know, you all know the way he dismisses climate change and calls it a total hoax. This is just one of many sort of symptoms of this sort of almost randomizing approach and cannibalizing approach of the Trumpist regime to sort of taking theory and remaking it in its own way and divorcing it from any kind of explanatory or empirical justification. Bessner and myself sought to come to terms with this recoding of resilience, in particular in the first Trump administration, in terms of what you could think of as the 3 R's of reactionary recoding. So what the first move was to reduce resilience to crisis management that obscures the causes of crisis. So you had tons of people in the first Trump administration regularly invoking the term resilience. We need more resilience for this, that, and the other system, the military, the communication system, the road infrastructure. We need more. They were happy to talk about that because it provided them with a euphemism for talking about keeping these systems going without mentioning the dreaded climate change word, which their boss had said was, you know, politically incorrect. You cannot mention climate change, it's a hoax. So there, all these people, especially the military, were scrambling to try and think, oh, how do we talk about, you know, keeping this base, you know, from getting flooded without mentioning climate change, or we'll use the word resilience. So this was the first thing that they did. The second thing was to repurpose resilience for championing fossil fuel business and investor interests. And the third thing was to re-territorialize resilience and to think about it not as a global project, nothing to do with COP, you know, meetings and global, the Paris Treaty and efforts to address climate change, but rather to think about it purely in terms of protecting the homeland with hardened bases, hardened borders, and firm us-them boundaries. The national security strategy was one of our examples. And we looked at how it basically didn't talk about the word climate. It used climate only to describe business climates. and it meant that they had to be business friendly. It did use the word resilience a lot. And the national security strategy in his first term used resilience in a special section entitled Promote American Resilience. And what that kind of promotion of American resilience persists to this day. Believe it or not, we are in Resilience Month, and the White House released a statement from President Trump last week on November the 4th, sharing this little nugget on resilience. Our nation's critical infrastructure is foundational to every American's way of life, protecting our national security, facilitating our economic stability, and ensuring our public safety. During Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience Month, we recommit to making America's systems and networks powerful, modern, and more resilient than ever before. Immediately after retaking office, I signed an executive order to unleash American energy. You here see the repurposing here, to restore our nation, capital N's, capacity to produce the critical resources that power our economy. By reasserting our energy dominance, we are rebuilding our supply chains, strengthening our industrial base, and fortifying the hardened base kind of logic here, the critical infrastructure that keeps our country safe, all while lowering costs and creating good paying jobs for Americans. Now, taking this to its most extreme is Stephen Miller in the administration, who I'm sure you all know about. He was widely critiqued for his speech at Charlie Kirk's memorial, was compared with Goebbels because of this speech. And in this speech, which I mean, it's horrific, but it's worth watching to see the style of his presentation. He says, "We are the storm. Our enemies cannot comprehend our strength, our determination, our resolve, our passion. Our lineage and our legacy hails back to Athens, to Rome, to Philadelphia, to Monticello. Our ancestors built the cities. They produced the art and architecture. They built the industry. We stand for what is good, what is virtuous, and what is noble. And we will stand every day for what is true, what is beautiful, and what is good. And we will achieve victory for our children, for our families, for our civilization, for every patriot who stands with us." And he got a roaring ovation. Well, from rhetoric to results, people are dying because of this rhetoric. In May 2025, Miller told Fox News that a senior White House official told Fox News that the White House was looking for ICE to arrest 3,000 people a day, a major increase in enforcement against those deemed non-patriotic, non-American. He called ICE's top 50 field heads to DC. And this is how it was reported by Anna Giaratelli. Miller came in there and eviscerated everyone. "You guys aren't doing a good job. You're horrible leaders." He just ripped into everybody. And the same reporter said, "He wants everybody arrested. Why aren't you at Home Depot? Why aren't you at 7-Eleven?" the official recited. And that drive is what then has led to the death of a Californian farm worker at a greenhouse not that far from us. Jaime Alanis, 57, died after falling off a greenhouse trying to escape ICE during a raid on the farm where he was working. His family said he was a hardworking and innocent man from Michoacan. Time is up. Time for Act 3. Okay, so I want to start this one with another short video, but it's what's inspired so much of the work that we've done at UCSC to build our global and community health program, and what inspires me to do projects like Camposano. It's from Paul Farmer, who's now sadly deceased, the physician and anthropologist who led Partners in Health before he passed away during COVID.
I believe in healthcare as a human right. I've worked as a doctor in many places and have seen where to be poor means to be bereft of rights. I saw early on, still just a medical student, the panicky dead end faced by so many of the destitute sick. A young woman dying in childbirth, a child writhing in the spasms of a terrible disease for which a vaccine has existed for more than a century, a friend whose guts were irreparably shredded by bacteria from impure water, an 8-year-old caught in crossfire. Li mouri bête, what a stupid death, goes one Haitian response. Fighting such stupid deaths is never the work of one or even of a small group. I've had the privilege of joining many others providing medical care to people who would otherwise not be able to get it. The number of those eager to serve is impressive, and so is the amount that can be accomplished. I believe that stupid deaths can be averted. We've done it again and again. But this hard and painful work has never yet been an urgent global priority. The fight for health as a human right, a fight with real promise, has so far been plagued by failures. Failure because we're chronically short of resources. Failure because we're too often at the mercy of those with the power and money to decide the fates of hundreds of millions. Failure because ill health, as we've learned again and again, is more often than not a symptom of poverty and violence and inequality. And we do little to fight those when we provide just vaccines or only treatment for one disease or another. Every premature death, and there are millions of these each year, should be considered a rebuke. I know it's not enough to attend only to the immediate needs of the patient in front of me. We must also call attention to the failures and inadequacy of our own best efforts. The goal of preventing human suffering must be linked to the task of bringing others, many others, into a movement for basic rights. The most vulnerable, those whose rights are trampled, those rarely invited to summarize their convictions for a radio audience, still believe in human rights, in spite of, or perhaps because of, their own troubles. Seeing this in Haiti and elsewhere has moved me deeply and taught me a great deal. I move uneasily between the obligation to intervene and the troubling knowledge that much of the work we do, praised as humanitarian or charitable, does not always lead us closer to our goal. That goal is nothing less than the refashioning of our world into one in which no one starves, drinks impure water, lives in fear of the powerful and violent, or dies ill and unattended. Of course, such a world is a utopia, and most of us know that we live in a dystopia. But all of us carry somewhere within us the belief that moving away from dystopia moves us towards something better and more humane. I still believe this.
It's incredibly moving and powerful. And he achieved so much in just 3 minutes of capturing the urgent need to do something about slow violence and structural vulnerability, the value of doing it, but also how many compromises there are and limitations there are on that work. Our own efforts around in Camposano are much more modest than Farmer's huge achievements with partners in health. But one of the reparative resilience elements of the project is to provide farm workers with this complaint form through which they can make anonymous complaints on the app about workplace risks that they face that aren't mitigated by their employers, but risks to which they are entitled to protection under existing California law. The form is very simple to use. We used images painted by our students so that it crosses language barriers, including to tricky speaking and Mixteco speaking farm workers who don't even speak Spanish. They have to answer yes or no about whether they've secured any of these protections that they're entitled to. And at the end, when they press submit on the form, it allows them to see the phone numbers for CRLA, that's the California Rural Legal Assistance. Finish?
You're partway through the Q&A period.
I know, okay, thanks. And a phone number for reaching CRLA in Salinas and Cal OSHA. And we've agreed with Cal OSHA on that. I think I can talk a little bit more in the Q&A about how this work is designed and what sorts of results it's generating. If you're interested, I also can talk about how the promotores are using the app. But I want to end by acknowledging my collaboration now with Margarita Azmitia and Catherine Cooper, who's joined us on Zoom. And as Bruce knows, he's a neighbor too. These guys are my neighbors in Cardiff Terrace. But with Margarita and Catherine, I'm doing a new project addressing farm worker challenges educationally. And we're looking to create clearer pathways for the farm worker community to access college and university and helping the school advisors and school districts make those pathways more navigable for farm workers. And that's connected to another task force report a group of GCH students put together that's online at this link that you can find easily on my webpage under Collab. So with that, I can take your questions. Thank you, Eli.
Thank you, Matt, and we do have time for questions.
What do you think about the comments of Bill Gates about his revision of his view of environmental climate change?
Yeah, I haven't read the details of what he said, but my sense was that he was trying to downplay big claims about climate change so as to keep some kind of adaptive work going that is funded by his foundation. Is that right?
I think the key things were that he realized that there were other issues about starvation and
Okay.
various other things that money could solve, and issues about priorities.
Okay. I mean, if you wanted a sort of a case study in what Duffield calls resilience in the ruins, it's the work of the Gates Foundation. The Gates Grand Challenges have taken this sort of step, little baby step by baby step kind of approach, never addressing systemic transformation. And I think this, what you're describing as his new approach, his new statement, is of a piece with the larger long-term trajectory of the foundation, not really ever sort of trying to think about building a new system, but simply picking off one micro problem after another. There's nothing bad about picking off those problems, but the chances of the solutions being of any lasting influence and of them being more inclusive for whole populations is greatly diminished if you shy away from a systemic approach. But it's the limitations of philanthrocapitalist sort of approaches that he represents. If you're interested, Catherine Mitchell and I have a piece in the journal Antipode on what we call the new Washington Consensus, trying to name the limitations of the Gates approach to global health.
Thank you.
Can you bring us up to date about ICE activities in Santa Cruz and Monterey County?
All I know from talking to folks at CCA and at Salud para la Gente and CAB is that they're very present, like they drive by their offices in a fairly menacing way on an ongoing basis. In terms of arrest numbers and deportations, I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know. There's been some journalism done that seemed to be good, but I don't know. Someone else may know better than me. Yeah, Chris.
There's a local organization in your area, Rapid Response, which monitors ICE activity in California. Several people in the room might be part of it. And so far, there's very little arresting and deportation activity in Santa Cruz County. And the farm workers, day laborers attest to that.
Yeah.
People expect it will happen, and if anyone's interested in getting involved in the monitoring of that, you can look up YARR and get involved.
Do you want to say what that stands for again?
Your Area Rapid Response.
Okay.
That's Santa Cruz County. And there's sort of sister organizations in San Benito and Monterey counties.
Thank you for that. One thing I would say, having met some of our local sheriffs and other people in authority, is they have a very delicate dance to dance between doing what they feel is right in terms of protecting the community and not becoming targets of a federal action themselves. And I suspect what is happening behind the scenes is a lot of careful work to try to protect communities, but not calling attention to it in a way that would then bring more federal interest in the area. Jim.
For me, one of the chilling aspects of your thought was your second part, to see how a word like resilience can be articulated negatively or in a different way. And of course, that's true of any general term that you pick. But resilience does have certain bias toward localism and therefore nationalism. Also a certain kind of sense of continuity and tradition being renewed and that kind of thing. So, but I'm just wondering whether, when you were deciding to use that term, whether there were other terms that you considered and rejected. Not that any of them are perfect or innocent or would do or not be appropriatable, but I'm wondering whether there were other terms or whether there's a semantic field of terms around the word resilience that you've considered.
Well, as you can tell, I'm drawn probably way too much to alliteration and to these sorts of PowerPoint style ways of remembering things like the 3 R's and so forth. And it's kind of like alliteration for me is a bit like a disease, I think. But anyway, there are a lot of R's that come to mind as alternative terms. And I kind of see them on a spectrum in a way, from revolution at one end to reaction at the other end. Resilience is sort of lodged there somewhere in the middle. There's reworking is used. Geographer Cindy Katz has a lot of interesting work on resilience in education, where she talks about the distinctions, the micro distinctions between reworking and resilience, at least at the level of systems. Part of the challenge, though, and of tracking a term like this is that some people are applying it at that personal level of personal trauma. So the psychology and educational literature often focuses more on, not exclusively by any means, and both Catherine Cooper and Margarita Asmiti have told me there's evolving psychological literatures on community level resilience, but there's a tendency in those fields to focus on the individual and building resilience at the personal capacity, whereas in nature sort of based science, they're looking more at ecosystem resilience, right, and thinking of it at a much more macro level, which extends, I think, beyond the nation to the global level. But I think you have to think about, perhaps this is the geographer in me talking, but you have to think about the scale at which the term is being operationalized before then trying to work out what the kind of framing of the term then leads to. The nationalistic framing that the Trumpists bring is, I guess, already kind of like obscuring some global issues and also deliberately underplaying the inequalities within the nation. So anyway, it's a good provocation, I think, to sort of think about how these terms are activated, but to think about them geographically is perhaps a useful help in working out where you're going to start tracking the valence of the term as it shifts in usage. Kathy, you had a question.
The context is my son's partner is in public health and gives in Ethiopia primarily grant Gates Foundation type funding or things like that. So, I hear whenever there are shifts going on there, and from those conversations, thinking in the context of young people going into this field with your 555 majors or things like that, how are you preparing them to deal with all of these diverse local? I mean, clearly it's easier to work on the local, but I assume some of them will be going on to public health, UN, all of those other things. I mean, what do you see for the next 5 or 10 years politically coming? How are you preparing them?
Oh gosh, it's such a
on. And are you telling them that some of the people are go to Canada, go to Europe, things like that?
No, I mean,
how does that figure into this education?
Well, great question. We don't by any means have all the answers. I think one thing I want to do 3 things. I've flag what we're doing around the e-portfolios as part of the answer, what we're doing in the intro class, and then talk about the university and do my epilogue. In terms of the e-portfolios, they're part of an effort, and obviously so many fields do this. It's not just global and community health. many faculty across the university try to introduce opportunities for some meta-reflection, metacognition by students of the context of their learning, so that they're not like looking at courses or assignments either as things that you tick off, but trying to think about how it fits into a larger picture. And if we approach the work of helping them prepare for the career world in the same spirit, with that sort of metacognitive element, it involves, I think, giving them a sense of what are the drivers of the jobs of the future. And we are trying to do that. But one of the visions that we had at the beginning of GCH that we still have not realized, and there are no funds for it right now, is that we wanted a dedicated career counselor who could make some of these connections alongside our academic advisors, and to really make it more systematic for students in terms of seeing the whole, so they don't just pick one career, like, oh, I want to be a physician's assistant, and then just narrowly pursue that, but sort of look at the landscape of health jobs and think about how they're evolving. So we are trying to address it that way. In the intro course right now, Sophie Salama and Danny Rahul are two professors who are teaching it. We're always doing this, combining a social scientist and a natural scientist. They're doing it together, and they were just writing to me and Grant Hartzog this week to say, we had an old video on the changing global health funding landscape. And now, you know, Doge has destroyed USAID. Trump has totally undermined funding for PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS Relief. So many other federal programs and funding for the World Health Organization have been destroyed. And so the only, the landscape's pretty down bleak. And we found a video that was quite useful in surveying that in the middle of the year. And it just keeps getting worse. Unfortunately, Gates Foundation, Clinton Foundation are some of the only sort of big pots of money left available. And as a Marxist geography, a friend of ours used to say, tainted money, tainted enough. So, that's sort of relevant at that level. But the university remains a place where we can adapt, where we can create space for thinking critically about the context and connecting students, not just to knowledge to deal with the problems, but to sort of put them in their place, to think about how they come together. And it's on that note that I wanted to have this epilogue, if I can go back to that, and I'll maybe end here with this. So I've been talking to a number of your Emeriti friends who feel like this is an especially threatening time for the university, and that the Emeriti, not just UCSC, but also more broadly, the whole system, whole country's university system. And given the experience and expertise that you all as Emeriti have, among the folks I'm talking to, there's like an interest in trying to pool that expertise. Everyone's doing things. The big march and the No King's March, there were so many of Emeriti there, but there's a lot of expertise in this room that might be usefully brought together. And so we put together a questionnaire to sort of gather the names of folks who might be interested in contributing to pooling their expertise. And if you are interested, Margaret and Kathy and Craig and Maureen have got these questionnaires to hand out, basically to get ideas for doing something, but also getting your names if you'd like to continue a conversation with other Emeriti about pooling your expertise to think about the resilience of the university at this really dire moment. When Bill Reddings wrote this book, The University in Ruins, he was a lit professor, and he was mainly reflecting on the threat of marketization and corporatization. And now that threat is put in the shade by the threat of the Trumpian compact. And so forms coming around. And those folks who are online, there's an online version here. And I don't know, Barry, if you can help me put that code in the chat for the, maybe you can't, that, for the folks who are online. Yes, question.
Wait. I think we're way over time.
Sorry.
And I know there are other questions. There are a number of questions. So I'd like to end the formal part. You don't have to be out of here till 2, but I want to end the formal part, and I want to thank Matt for his great comment. You can talk to them informally, formal, however you want to do it, but the formal part is no. Thank you.